Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Blizzard's Greatest Games podcast. My name is Marcus Speller. With me, of course, is Jonathan Wilson. And with us is Brian Homewood. Brian is a freelance journalist based in Portugal who has worked for Reuters and contributed to World Soccer, ESPN, and When Saturday Comes, among others. He has covered numerous Africa Cup of Nations and Copa America tournaments as well. Brian, welcome to the pod.
Thanks very much, Marcus.
Today we go back to March 1981. The stage was the Boleyn Ground and the match was West Ham United 1, Dinamo Tbilisi 4. Brian, why have you gone for this game?
I've gone for this game, first of all, because I was there. I was a part-time West Ham supporter at the time. and it was just an incredible match because of the way Dinamo Tbilisi was such a surprise to most people at the time, even though they had beaten Liverpool 3 seasons earlier. But it was just such a... I think everyone who was at the game was struck by the quality of the play. And they were absolutely lethal on the counter-attack. Every time they came forward, it looks as if they're going to score. And their technique seemed to be a different level above West Ham. I think we had the idea at the time that foreign teams wouldn't be able to handle the atmosphere at Upton Park, that they were intimidated by, because the crowd was incredibly close to the pitch in those days. And I think West Ham had an almost perfect home record in European competition before then. They hadn't, if I remember rightly, they lost 1 out of 11 or 12 previous home games that they'd taken part in the Cup Winners Cup. This was the 4th time they'd taken part in the Cup Winners Cup, and I think they'd lost 1 game at home. And they were running away with the second division at the time. That was one of the even though they were in the second division, it was one of the best teams they'd ever had. And I don't think anyone really expected. No one imagined what was going to happen. And Tbilisi got pretty much a standing ovation at the end, which was surprising as well, because this being at the height of the Cold War, of course, as well.
Yeah. Well, of course, West Ham had won the FA Cup. West Ham had won the FA Cup to qualify for the Cup Winners' Cup, hence the name of the tournament. So there were no mugs, of course.
Yeah. No, exactly. I think people thought and they got, if I remember rightly, they got to the League Cup final the same year. And I think people thought they could actually win. They could go on to win it. If you look at the lineup at the time, the other teams there was Newport County in the quarterfinals. The Welsh Cup winners, they were in the 3rd division at the time. You had Carl Zeiss Jena, Slavia Sofia. The strongest contenders seemed to be Feyenoord, Fortuna Düsseldorf, and Benfica. And the final was in Düsseldorf. You've got to remember at the time as well, teams like Tbilisi, we knew almost nothing about. People didn't even know where Tbilisi is, I don't think. And there was this general assumption that it was in Russia. People didn't. I don't think anyone even heard of Georgia at the time. It was, you tended to Soviet Union, Russia. You use the words interchangeably almost. It was completely different from nowadays when you face a team in Europe, you know all about them, all the details of players and everything. So that's why I've gone for it. They were by far the best. They were by far the best team I ever saw play at Upton Park.
Yeah, I mean,
by a long way.
In the list of Cup winners, obviously the trophy is no longer, but we enjoyed it. It was great while it lasted. There are a number of teams who, if you look at the winners list, Jonathan, of the teams who have won the cup or who won the cup, a number of them are currently a long way off from winning another European trophy. Again, it's fair to say, but to the modern football fan and younger listeners, the name Dinamo Tbilisi is possibly the most obscure name on that list of winners.
Yeah, maybe. I think the Cup Winners' Cup, the quality varied radically from season to season, for very obvious reasons. That the UEFA Cup or the Fairs Cup, because you had 3 or 4 or 5 clubs per country, you sort of had a critical mass of quality. The European Cup, because it was the champions, you obviously had quality. The Cup Winners' Cup, you quite often got freakish winners of cups. So you could get some very weak years, or you could get some very strong years. And I think, as Brian says, this at first glance looks a pretty weak year. The English winners are a second division team. Okay, a team was better than the second division, and Dinamo Tbilisi, who people probably didn't know much about, although they, as Brian mentioned, they had put Liverpool out of the European Cup the previous season when they'd been absolutely brilliant in the Paishadze. And this idea that Dinamo Tbilisi might be intimidated by the Boleyn Ground. And if you've ever been to the Paishadze, I mean, I've only been once, and it's one of those classic sort of concrete bowls. It's huge. Yeah. But
you're scared to go back, Jonathan.
Well, I was there for an Intertoto Cup game, and it wasn't even Dinamo. It was Georgia Tbilisi were playing SV Ried of Austria, and you could see. I mean, it was it was like 15,000 there, and there's 80,000 bowl. But you could see what it might have been like. And you look at pictures of when they beat Liverpool, and that game, a sort of famous images afterwards, when they've all rolled up newspapers and set them on fire, and there's all these blazing torches. And even if you look back at sort of Soviet memoirs from footballers, players who played for Moscow clubs or for Dynamo Kiev, they talk about going to Tbilisi as being pretty terrifying. It was an unruly, lawless place with 80,000 people going berserk. So I think if you've grown up playing in that environment, even Upton Park on a bad night isn't really gonna shake you that much. But this was a team who the team had been together for 4 or 5 seasons. This was really at its peak. You see it declined very rapidly after this, but they'd won the league in 78 and they won the Soviet Cup in 76 and 79. So this was a team that had been together and was in its real sort of purple patch of form. And West Ham got them on maybe their best ever night.
I mean, some say, Jonathan, Dinamo was sort of a de facto national team for Georgia.
For Georgia, yeah, that's true. I mean, it's very. You remember that conversation we had with Sasha Gurianov about the complications of Spartak and Dinamo Kiev, and the Dinamo club was run by the Interior Ministry, by the secret police. So that immediately creates a slight divide. And if you're a hardcore Georgian nationalist, you don't support the Soviet secret police team. But for the vast majority of people, yes, it is a de facto Georgian national team. All the players are Georgian, and they, all the sort of resources of the state's football go into that one club. And they're a team who the story was always told that they were Lavrenti Beria's team, and Beria was the head of the NKVD, of Stalin's secret police, the foreigners of the KGB. And while that may be true, if he really was fixing games, as it was alleged he did, he was really bad at it because he didn't win anything until 1964, which was 11 years after he died. So I tend to take that with a slight pinch of salt. But yes, they were the secret police team, and they were very much the sort of Georgian national team, and most of the time the only Georgian team in the Soviet top flight.
That puts a different light on this. Yeah, that puts a different light on this idea that they might have been plucky outsiders. Really, what you just said.
Well, I mean, but the thing is, they kind of are outsiders in the sense that they are Georgians within the Soviet Union, and Georgia clearly is not one of the two main powers in the Soviet Union. So from that point of view, they are outsiders, but they're the secret police team. So from that point of view, and this is exactly the conversation we had with Sasha about Dynamo Kiev, this odd position they have of being within their own republic, absolutely the establishment, but within the context of the Soviet Union, outsiders in a particular sense.
Yeah, I suppose it's not too different to some clubs in some small European countries nowadays. Like, I don't know, maybe Dinamo Zagreb, who win the Croatian Championship every year, but when they get into Europe, they're outside, they're minnows.
Well, I mean, Dinamo Zagreb were equally the secret police team of Croatia, and then when Tudjman takes power, he makes them Croatia Zagreb. He changes the team's name, to emphasise they are the team of the nation, and they then change it back. So yeah, there's absolutely, I think, that sense.
I mean, going back to the football itself, I mean, we know that a lot of teams from the Soviet Union in that era, there was a sort of certain playing styles and whatnot. But this from Craig McCracken, who wrote in The Guardian, Dinamo Tbilisi blended the best of two seemingly conflicting playing styles: the hard-running, quick passing game, typical of Russian and Ukrainian teams, and the more traditional Georgian and Armenian game based around individual skill and self-expression. I mean, Brian, you said that they've wowed the crowd at Old Upton Park, and they got a standing ovation. This is the kind of thing that you saw on that memorable evening.
Well, funnily enough, actually, although we say nothing was known about them, in the West Ham programme notes there was a description much like that. So they had managed to get some information. It said their style is inventive, brilliantly technical, and attacking football. The players are allowed to express themselves and enjoy doing so. It was they didn't dominate the match from start to finish. It was they played in spurts, but when they put as I said, their technique and their movement was just in a different class. I think one match report I read at the time said that West Ham's players moved like wooden soldiers in comparison to Tbilisi.
Yeah, it's interesting, Jonathan, because again, some reports you read about that Dinamo side, they like to mix up the pace and the tempo. It wasn't all just power and pace. It was almost sort of a bit start and stop, which is what Brian is suggesting.
Yeah, I mean, as you suggested with that quote before, Georgian football, the stereotype is of it's dribblers. Mm-hmm. And again, if you read match reports from the 50s and 60s, they'll always talk about how if you were a dribbler from Moscow and you went there, the crowd would cheer you if you dribble past two Dinamo Tbilisi players. They like their dribblers. So Eduard Streltsov, the great doomed centre forward of Torpedo, I think his first ever league goal was at the Paishadze. Maybe not against Dinamo Tbilisi, because in those days they used to play the early season games in the south because of the climate, because of the winter. He was always a huge favourite in Tbilisi because of his technical ability. So I think what you see, and this is true in Armenia as well, when Arat Yerevan did the double in '73, I think, and Nikita Simonian, who was the great Spartak centre forward of Armenian descent, goes there, and he sort of takes the sort of raw technical ability, and he imposes a structure. And I think you see a similar thing with this Dinamo in this period that we're talking about, the sort of late '70s, early '80s, under Nodar Akalkatsi, who was the coach all the way through that period, sort of 7 or 8 years he was in charge. And he was very much about sort of taking this individual brilliance and creating a framework in which that could have a bit more structure than it had.
Yeah, when you're talking about they like a dribbler in Georgia, I mean, I think of a more modern reference, although not that modern, I suppose, nowadays, Georgi Kinkladze.
Yeah, but he's absolutely he's the absolute archetype of the of a Georgian player. And you think of, I mean, in that Torpedo team alongside Streltsov, they had Slava Mitrovelli, who, of course, was a winger. I think the keeper in that team was a Georgian as well. But yeah, if Georgians made it to Moscow, they tended to be wingers. And they would be these great dribblers. That was what Georgian football was about.
Excellent. All right, we'll have a quick break, everybody, and then after that, we will talk about the match itself. Back in a sec. Welcome back, everybody. Right, let's get to the match itself. So, yes, Brian, it was. I'm assuming a sort of slightly chilly March evening in East London.
It was wet and chilly, yes.
Yeah. The scenes from the YouTube clips I could find sort of testify to that. But what about West Ham themselves? West Ham, their David Cross was up front, of course. Trevor Brooking was in the side.
Trevor Brooking, Alan Devonshire, Phil Parks in goal, Ray Stewart at right back, if I remember rightly. Frank Lampard Sr. was playing. Mm-hmm. I think we had David Cross finished as top scorer in the competition. Strangely enough, 6 goals. They got past Castilla Madrid in the first round. The second leg was Castilla Madrid were Real Madrid's reserve side. The second leg was played behind closed doors at Upton Park because of crowd riot in the first leg in Madrid. They then thumped a Romanian team, Politecnica Timișoara, in the second round. The match itself, it went pretty much as expected for the first 20 minutes, then 25 minutes, then Chivadze scored this. He got the ball, I think, inside his own half. He burst forward and he just thumped the shot from the middle.
It's a brilliant goal. It really is.
It's worth YouTubing if you haven't seen it.
Yeah, exactly. There is that. Is that the YouTube with the video with the old Soviet commentary?
Yes, I believe so.
And the quality of the footage is appalling. It's almost impossible to work out who anybody is.
Yes. And actually, the second leg, I couldn't find anything at all. Have you found anything from the second leg?
I didn't find that, no. But I mean, that first goal, the idea that this bloke was their sweeper, he was their centre back.
Yes.
Just drives forward. And I mean, nobody challenges him, is the criticism you make. The defence backs off and backs off. Then as soon as they stop, he just pings in the top corner from
25, 30 yards?
Yeah, between 25 and 30 yards, I think that's about right, yeah. And of course, he'd go on to score against Scotland in the World Cup later that summer. The following summer.
In 82.
Scotland maybe should have been forewarned that he was a bit more than just a centre-back.
Yeah, but I mean, it shows you, Brian, the sort of, maybe the lack of understanding, because, I mean, I'm sure if, that was as it was the old Division 2 then, if the opposition centre-half has strode forward and he's going through, you would back off, wouldn't you? You'd think, whatever you want to do, have a go and we'll get the goal kick and we can start again. Perhaps, I mean, what was the feeling when that goal went in? Was it kind of like, oh, hang on,
there was this kind of collective, gasp. I mean, I didn't see it, to be honest, because I didn't actually, if you were standing on the north bank behind the goal, in those days, you couldn't actually see the goal. You would only know what's happened by the reaction of the crowd, and so there was just like this collective sort of sense of awe almost the way he hit it. So that was the first goal, and then a few minutes later there was I seem to remember a complete mix-up in the West Ham defence, and he scored another one.
Yeah, it's a West Ham corner, which is clear.
Exactly. Yeah,
it's sort of it's not sort of a precise breakaway. It's sort of a bit of an up and under, and Ray Stewart sort of gets caught underneath it by Gutsaeff, who then runs on. And it's one of those occasions where as soon as Gutsaeff has the ball, it's a goal. Yeah, he's in control of that, and there's no way Parks is stopping him.
No.
Yeah.
I think that certainly becomes a theme, doesn't it? And that was a sign of things to come. You have the spectacular first goal, but in that second goal, it was just, I think it was Ray Stewart, as you say, that sort of got a bit caught up, and it's just pounced upon, and it's a siege onto the goal just by a single player. There's no doubt that he was going to put that away, and you must be thinking then, if you're a West Ham United fan, Brian, well, hang on, this could be quite a long night.
Yes, we were. Yes. Although there was still a sense that if they could get one, there was still that sense if you could get one back, anything could happen. But no one quite. No, you're right. There was this sense that every time they came forward, they looked like scoring.
Yeah, I mean, I'd imagine that even nowadays, if teams play, a Georgian side, they wouldn't know what to expect, and they'd probably expect a victory though. But back then, I mean, what was the feeling among the fans before the match? West Ham obviously got a bit of cup pedigree, hence they were in the competition.
Yeah.
Little known, of course, about the opposition, but I mean, but they were a second division side, so they weren't a first division side, West Ham. So,
I think people felt they shouldn't have been in the second division, because they were running away with it that season. They won the cup the season before. They'd beaten, obviously, Arsenal in the final. They'd beaten Everton. in the semi-final. They'd beaten, I think, Aston Villa, and I think they'd beaten another First Division team on the way. And I think for that reason, that's probably why they didn't get promoted that season, because they got distracted by the cup. So there is, I know it's an old cliche, they're too good for the second division, but I think people did think that at the time, because they thumped Polytechnica Timisoara so easily in the previous round. People were confident they could beat this team, and Soviet teams hadn't really done that well in European football at the time. And generally, people were fairly confident they could beat this team over two legs. They had no idea what was going to hit them.
Yeah, and it certainly did hit them. And they were 2-0 down at half time. And then into the second half, West Ham did get that goal back through David Cross, of course.
Yeah, and then Tbilisi went down right down the other end a minute later and scored again.
Well, there was a bit of controversy, you could argue, over David Cross's goal, because the goalkeeper believed that it hadn't crossed the line.
Yes.
We don't have the camera angles, of course, that we did today, but it seemed like a tight one, Jonathan.
I mean, it's just impossible to tell.
Yeah, I thought I'd throw that on you.
So it's a near post corner. Cross gets to it. I guess the classic way that English teams scored against your fancy Dan foreigners in those days. And Gabelia, the keeper, you can't even really see what happens, because his player's got to go across the line of a camera, and there's only the one camera. And he sort of, I'm not even sure if he catches it and drops it, or if he just sort of palms it out. The one thing I would say that makes me think it did go in is he's the only one who protests. None of the other defenders protest. Their reaction straight away is to go, ugh. So, but I mean, you can't make concrete judgments on that. Mm-hmm. But it's given anyway. So it was a goal.
Not that it mattered, of course, Brian, as you say, up
the
other end.
Straight up the other end.
Dinamo. Absolutely ridiculous.
But that goal is where I say I still haven't worked out. So it's sort of it's Shengelia flicks it on, and I can't quite see who he flicks it on to. The footage is so bad I can't see the number on the back of the shirt. I think it's Daraselia, but I'm not 100% certain. Who then, I think he volleys it, but Frank Lampard Senior comes flying in with a challenge. I'm not convinced it's not Frank Lampard Senior who actually, his challenge hits the ball onto the post, and it pops out and Shengelia follows it in.
Could it have been Kipiani?
No, I think it's Kipiani's ball forward, isn't it?
Okay. But either or, again, when they come forward like they do, and they post hit, and then the rebound is scored again, it feels inevitable. It feels like they are just going to, either through craft or by force, get that ball in the back of the net.
Yeah, I remember being struck by how quick it happened at the time. It was just like a pinball thing, and they reacted so quickly.
I mean, if it is a volley, it's the technical quality of that volley is amazing. But it might be that it's Lampard's challenge. You really just can't tell. I think realistically it must be a volley, because
I thought it was a volley, if I'm honest. If that's worth anything,
it's worth so much more, because I can't tell you.
We finally solved that one, and I thought the ball had crossed the line as well, so no more debate there. And then 12 minutes later, Shengelia again
down the
scores.
Right.
But it's the counter-attacking, Brian, that you mentioned at the start of this, just how quickly and effectively Dinamo counter-attacked.
Yeah, exactly. And at that point, we thought this could be 6 or 7 or something ridiculous.
Yeah.
I mean, that is Kipiani's pass. And Kipiani, I think he was regarded as being in an exceptionally good side. I think he was regarded as being the best. And it's his long pass out to Shengelia coming in from the right, and it sort of just beats 2 players, but there's no real effort to it. And you think he's gone a little bit too far. You think that he's closed off the angle, and he just shapes it in the bottom corner, and it's just a brilliant breakaway goal. And I'm not even sure how you're meant to defend against that. For a player coming in on the angle like that, and as soon as he gets the run on them, I mean, I guess the thing where you'd be critical of West Ham from a modern point of view, and maybe this is imposing ludicrous modern standards on old football, but they have no protection in front of that back four. I mean, they've got Brooking and Pike as the two central midfielders. I guess Brooking's never going to be sitting deep, but whether Pike should have been deeper to give him that protection. But I guess as you were saying earlier, as a second division team in 1981, you probably just didn't need that. And so, how long was it before we sort of generally in British football acknowledged it was quite useful to have one of your two central midfielders sitting a bit deeper? It's another sort of 15, 20 years where that becomes a common feature. So, but that's why the goals happen, is because of that huge amount of space in front of the back four.
And the match finishes 4-1, of course. And Brian, it's nice to hear that the Dinamo players got a little bit of a standing ovation, or a round of applause at least, when they went off.
Yeah, it was pretty close to a standing ovation, I'd say. Which again was surprising. That was pretty rare. I don't think I've ever seen a reception like that at Upton Park, to be honest.
But it is one of those games, when you talk to West Ham fans, I apologise for this, Brian, of a certain generation. Yeah, they do talk in odd terms about this game. It clearly made an enormous impression.
Yes.
And I think that does sometimes. Maybe it doesn't happen quite so much now, but yes, sometimes you play against an opponent who are just better than you, and you just sort of think, well, they've been brilliant, and so well done.
Yeah. Yeah, that was basically it.
I mean, I guess when Ronaldo scored that hat trick for Real Madrid against Manchester United, whenever that was, but he was applauded off. So that's an example of it happening. I mean, 15 years ago now, but it does still occasionally happen. But another rare one was Ronaldinho at the Bernabeu, of course. Yeah, absolutely. Without getting off topic too much, but yeah, the only surprising thing I would say, given all the context and information, was that West Ham actually won the second leg, Brian, 1-0 away.
Well, yes, I think it was a Stuart Pearson goal right at the end.
Yeah, possibly.
But that was Tbilisi were a very inconsistent team, I think. Because the final against Carl Zeiss Jena was apparently, by all accounts, a fairly dour affair. Again, the second leg was interesting because of the travel difficulties as well. Apparently, it took 28 hours for them to get to Tbilisi. They had to fly via Moscow. You couldn't fly direct. They were held in some pen at Moscow airport for several hours, and then there was some very long bureaucratic process for the players to be able to use the bathroom. They had to apparently an hour-long discussion with officials, and players had to go one by one to the bathroom. Eventually, they stayed the night in Moscow, and they flew to Tbilisi the following day. And when they got to Tbilisi, they had a really warm reception, by all accounts. Okay. But that's what travelling was like in those days. It wasn't, especially to Eastern Europe. Again,
you earned your away goals back in those days, didn't you? My goodness, yeah. I mean, going on, yeah.
There is a tantalising video on YouTube, which is 48 seconds long, which claims to be the second leg, a video of the second leg. But all you can get there, all you see there is some fence. You see the teams coming out onto the pitch, and it does appear to be Tbilisi and West Ham. You then see some fences, a line of cars, and then you see a television cameraman and the TV commentator, and that's it.
What more do you need?
What do you think? But I think they did show the goal on British television at the time. To actually find any more footage other than that is nigh on impossible.
But I mean, I guess the game is done, right? It doesn't really matter.
Yeah. Oh no, the game was done, but I think again that was shows how little we knew about these matches that were played in Eastern Europe at the time.
The thing that really strikes me, there's a photograph taken in Rotterdam before the second leg of a semi-final when they beat Feyenoord 3-0 at home, they lose 2-0 in Rotterdam. But there's a photograph of, I think it's Shivadze, Shengelia and Gutsayev. And they're all wearing very tight trousers. They've all got their hands tucked in their pockets and it looks really uncomfortable. But they somehow look unbelievably stylish. And it's a very sort of characteristic sort of Dutch street. So there's one of those Seiko clocks. There's an Austin Reed in the background, but it's that sort of brutalist Rotterdam architecture. And that photo, which it's on certainly one of those players' Wikipedia pages, it's just a great photo of this was actually what stylish Soviet men looked like at the time. But they do look really stylish. And they also have... Moustaches were a big thing at the time. Kipiani had a great moustache.
Yeah.
And Kipiani died 2001, I think. Died in a car crash. He was only 49. And he still had the moustache then. And he'd been assistant to the national team. And they renamed the Georgian Cup after him. And they named the stadium in his hometown of Gurjani after him. But this is actually, they're quite a tragic team. That a lot of them die young.
Yeah.
So Shengelia got a brain hemorrhage and died age 58 in 2012. And the most shocking was Daraselia, who scores the late winner in the final against Carl Zeiss Jena, who just after the 82 World Cup drives his car off a cliff. It took them 13 days to find the body because it was swept away by the river, and they found his body buried in these sandbanks, and they had sort of sniffer dogs out.
My goodness.
And so it was a team that sort of tragedy haunted them. But I mean, Daraselia had been brilliant in the World Cup. That 82 Soviet team at the World Cup, who they're in that group with Brazil and New Zealand and Scotland. And the game against Brazil is a brilliant game of football that they lose, but it's a brilliant game. And then Scotland need to beat them because their goal difference is better because Brazil had absolutely hammered Scotland. And it's a 2-2 draw, and the two scorers are Shivadze and Shengelia. It's two Georgians who scored. That team was based on, at least in part, on this team. And Akelkatsky, the manager, was one of the three. The Soviets had three managers. Beskov was the head coach, and then they had Lobanovsky and Akelkatsky as his two sort of assistants. So the Georgian influence, I think, was never stronger in Soviet football than it was this period in the early 80s.
Well, Shivadze, he went on to manage Georgia, didn't he, in the early noughties, which, is a more positive story, I think, considering some of the ones you've just mentioned there, Jonathan.
Yeah, and also Kazanishvili, his son, went on to play for Dundee and Rangers and Blackburn, and was he at Newcastle as well? Zurab Kazanishvili? They're people who, the ones who survived are people who had sort of a significant role in Georgian football. Gutsayev became an MP. And I mean, you want positive stories. This isn't positive, but he was accused of...
They've had a lot of political change in Georgia.
Well, he was accused of offering $20 million to the leader of South Ossetia to stop his independence demands.
Really? Okay.
So I guess that maybe isn't so positive, but they went on to sort of play significant roles in Georgian football and Georgian politics.
Yeah, well, Dinamo themselves more recently in 2013 were hammered by Spurs in a Europa League playoff, 8-0 on aggregate, 7.5, 8 years ago now. That was the last time I can sort of remember them reappearing on the map. But Brian, it's been a pleasure talking to you about this game. It really has, because, as I say, sometimes when you see these teams from the past and so on, you think, oh, okay, and then it's suddenly the context, and you think, well, of course they won the Cup Winners' Cup with a side like that.
Yeah. But again, I mean, Eastern Europe Soviet teams at the time weren't as dominant as you might expect. I think if you look at the line, I think UEFA must have been praying that Fortuna Düsseldorf got to that final, because the final was in Düsseldorf, and in fact, the final against Carl Zeiss Jena had, I think, 4,000 people. I think it was the lowest attendance. Yeah, it was the lowest attendance ever at a European final.
Just because it was so hard for people from Eastern Bloc to get across to the West. And I guess particularly East Germans going to West Germany will be hugely difficult.
Yeah. But again, in the semi-final, they hammered final 3-0 at home. But then they lost 2-0 away. So it does seem they were a very inconsistent team. And the following year, I think they got to the semi-final. Jonathan, is that right?
Yeah, that's right. But they were already, I think, on the decline by then. But I mean, they had they had beaten Napoli in the late 70s. I mean, the story about 78-9 they beat Napoli in the Cup Winners' Cup, and Daraselia. So again, they'd won the home game. I think they won the home game 2-0. They went to Naples, and Daraselia's wife was heavily pregnant, and there was a whole sort of hoo-ha as to whether he would go to Italy or not. And he eventually goes, and he says, "Right, whoever scores the first goal, obviously getting the away goal was going to be crucial. So whoever scores that first away goal, if the kid's a boy, I'll name him after whoever scores the goal, and then he scores the goal. So his son is also called Vitali."
It's a fitting tribute to the great
absolutely.
man. He sort of bestowed on himself, but
can you imagine sort of doing that? And you're looking around the team and thinking, God, I don't want to call him Nodar, so he's not passing to Kisnashvili. I wouldn't mind him being called David. I'll pass to Kipiani. That's fine.
Yeah.
Oh, it's all right. I'll do it myself. I quite like Vitali as a name.
Oh, gentlemen. Well, there we are. It's been great talking about this, and I think when all said and done about some of these teams whose star shines very brightly for whether it be a few years or sort of a moment, their name is in the history books because they won the Cup Winners' Cup in a sort of a European or international kind of wide sense, which is marvellous.
Well, I think it's one of the tragedies of modern football that a team like Dinamo Tbilisi can't have that kind of success again. I mean, Georgia's a great football country. It's produced great players. I mean, this period we're talking about, so Soviet Player of the Year, 77 is Kipiani, 78 Shengelia, 80 Shivadze, 81 Shengelia. So 4 out of 5 years, Georgians win Soviet Player of the Year. But now they'd be plucked off and they'd be playing in in Germany or the Netherlands or wherever as soon as they show any promise. And you have that huge stadium, you have the Paishadze there, and it's sort of a bit of a white elephant because apart from a very occasional Georgian national team game, when's it ever going to be full for a game that actually has real sort of global significance?
Do you think that bringing together some of these smaller leagues might be the answer? I mean, you hear it. I mean, all right, Belgium, Holland, Luxembourg's the obvious one. I don't know what you do in that part of the world because it's so volatile. But there are other countries that could unite, I imagine.
Yeah, I mean, logically you'd think yes, but then you look at when they tried to do that with the 3 Baltic states, with Latvia, Estonia, Lithuania, and so they had the domestic leagues, but they also had sort of at the end of the season they had a competition for the best 3 teams from each country or whatever, and nobody cared, nobody went to watch it, so there was no real appetite for it locally. So I think there's 2 problems of it's sort of when you've got established domestic leagues, it feels artificial. And so you maybe it's hard to get that sort of that interest, and then you've got all the sort of internal political wranglings for the former Yugoslavia, where they do that in basketball, and it seems to work relatively well. But the difficulty doing that in football, the security issues raised by doing it in football, I think are so great that it just becomes impossible. And UEFA are pretty set against it anyway. So
yeah, it's the same in Switzerland and Austria. I remember talking to someone from FC Basel about it once, and he said, well, how about a joint league? And he said, our supporters would rather face FC Zurich 4 times a year than play against Sturm Graz or Wacker Innsbruck. It's no...
I don't know if it would make more sense in areas where there sort of was that tradition. So whether Austria and Hungary, I mean, again, politically at the minute, there's no way that could happen. But the fact that their teams club sides, certainly before the Second World War, played each other so often, and there's such a sort of mutual influence, whether it's more palatable there, but I think there's so many obstacles it becomes almost impossible. But it's unhelpful that it's impossible.
Yeah.
There we are. Brian, pleasure. having you on the podcast. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Marcus.
For more stories like that, do check out theblizzard.co.uk. But myself and Jonathan will be back next week with another great game from the world of football. See you then.